Well, good morning and welcome to the fifth and final day of our first ever Louisiana Wind Week. My name is Harry Vorhoff. I'm the Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities. It's been a full week of presentations, discussions, and information sharing. To recap, we started off with a discussion of the Edwards and Biden administration's priorities, highlighting the opportunity that offshore wind can play in terms of jobs and economic growth, as well as reducing our emissions and addressing the root cause of climate change. We also received a walkthrough from BOEM and the Department of Natural Resources on the leasing processes for offshore wind in federal and in state waters, respectively. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we brought in some of the stakeholders to the table to begin the conversation on potential impacts on birds and aquatic species, as well as existing users like the commercial fishing industry, oil and gas, maritime, and coastal restoration. These conversations were really just the beginning of a dialogue that we'll need to continue to have with many more stakeholders over many more discussions. Yesterday, we had a fascinating discussion about the transmission planning and energy regulation side of offshore wind development. This was also just one discussion that is part of a larger dialogue and a continuing dialogue that we'll need to have as we progress in our pursuit of offshore wind. And which brings me to today and today's discussion about the existing and future supply chain capacity here in Louisiana. We have two consecutive hour-long panels with some real heavy hitters in this space. Our first panel is composed of market participants, and they'll be really sharing what they're seeing on their ground and their experience in the offshore wind sector of our economy. We're honored to have Representative Joe Orgeron to moderate the panel, which includes James Martin, Director of Blade Platform Development with LM Wind Power, Bill Blanchard, Senior Vice President of Development with Gulf Island Fabrication, Sarah Gazizadeh, Manager of Renewable Energies with Keystone Engineering, Robert Clemens, Vice President of Edison Schwest Offshore, and Benton LeBlanc, President of Okeanis Science and Technology. The second panel is composed of representatives of our ports and organizations and institutions looking at the economic development opportunity of renewable energy like offshore wind. That panel will be moderated by Louisiana Economic Development Deputy Secretary Brad Lambert. Our panelists will include Michael Hecht, President and CEO of GNO Inc., Christy Lumpkin, Economic Development Director for Lafourche Parish, Richard Self, Executive Director of the Port of Lake Charles, Chet Chasson, Executive Director of Port Fourchon, Claire Marceau, Port Director at Cameron Port, Harbor and Terminal District, and Professor Terry Chambers, Director of Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Center at University of Louisiana Lafayette. While our moderators have some questions teed up, waiting in the queue, we want to hear from our attendees. We've had a very robust discussion and participation thus far over the course of this week, and we hope that continues. So you can type your questions or comments into the chat, and I'll read any questions out. Or if you want to speak your comment or question, you can raise your hand, which is located under reactions on the lower part of your screen, and the host, I will unmute you at the appropriate time. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to really jump into our first panel by introducing our moderator, Joe Orgeron, who is currently the Louisiana State Representative for District 54, and the co-founder of Second Wind Marine LLC. He's also an adjunct professor at Nichols State University. And I believe you also hold a PhD in physics. So welcome, Representative, Professor, Dr. Orgeron, and thank you for being with us here today. We greatly appreciate it. The floor is yours. You're on mute. There we go.
Right. I had unmuted it, but I guess as moderator, you have the ability to mute me, which I like. Very good. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. First, as someone who got into offshore wind inadvertently back in 2009 and have been doing it being interested in it ever since, and seeing how Louisiana businesses can capitalize on this burgeoning market. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have pivoted to some extent into the political arena, and an honor serving, with the activities that Governor Edwards is doing for the climate change initiative, as well as the BOLM task force. And it's really just an awesome culmination for it to all come back together, and me to moderate this panel of people that one way or another I've worked with over the last years. So I really do appreciate the ability to be here, and I look forward to continuing the exploration on not only what we've been working on, which is how Louisiana companies can benefit from bringing our expertise and technologies and services up to the East Coast to help to develop offshore wind there, but now to explore in our backyard in a much more cost-effective and hopefully even more expeditious manner on how to bring renewable offshore energy to locally. So it's an honor. Should I continue on and begin talking with the rest of the panel? All right. Well then, as I've said, I always like looking at the supply chain in the order in which projects or offshore wind projects happen, and it's generally in 5 stages. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists here at the round table and let them give an update on how their play works in the offshore wind market. And I would like them to, in their own description, try to contrast, compare and contrast what they're focusing on the East Coast, how that works, and look forward through the looking glass to the Gulf of Mexico, and how those efforts can be parlayed here more locally. So the way most offshore wind projects work, of course, is in 5 steps. I'm gonna start over here: siting and permitting, designing, construction, transportation and installation, and finally operation and maintenance. And I believe I'm going to start with Mr. Benton LeBlanc, if you don't mind unmuting yourself. And you're involved with Okeanos. I mean, we've been knowing each other for quite a while, and I always saw you as soon as the lease sale is done, you're man on the ground talking to people and getting out there. So please go ahead and explain what your business does and how you basically kick off the whole operation of getting an offshore wind project started.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. It's an honor. Okeanos has been a part of offshore wind since 2016. Primarily, as you mentioned, we're in the early stages with permitting. We actually will get involved in pre-permitting analysis from time to time with regulatory agencies and with the end clients. Our primary business line is typically around geophysical, geotechnical, and environmental survey. So we provide equipment both under the water and above the water from the vessel to be able to launch and recover survey type equipment to aid in mapping, soil sampling, water sampling, mammal observations, and things of the like. So very much in the way of compliance and helping our clients to plan their installations prior to execution.
Thank you, Ben. And just from what I understand, there are other players in the food chain that the project developers may hire between your equipment and the developers themselves. Companies, whether it be Fugro or Terrason or companies like that, that basically rent your equipment and actually hire the crews to go out there.
Correct. Our primary function is equipment provider. So, we will outfit a vessel of opportunity. We will further outfit an already, kitted up survey vessel. But yes, our typical clients are survey companies, environmental survey companies, science companies, regulatory institutions that are acting on behalf of the operators.
And before I move on to design with Ms. Sarah there, I'd like to point out, you said pre-existing survey vessels are vessels of opportunity. And you probably can agree that some of those vessels of opportunity are Louisiana-based oil and gas operators who have also brought their OSVs and put basically labs on the back and as well as your equipment and is doing it. So that's been for quite a bit of time, correct?
Correct. We actually, our primary business is turning in a vessel of opportunity into a survey vessel. So we have done that since 2016 in Louisiana, primarily, and they will transit the vessel to the East Coast for the existing work there. So what we are doing today is utilizing Louisiana assets and bringing them to the East Coast in a turnkey fashion, because we can do it a lot more efficient and a lot more cost effective here on the ground, and then just bring the vessel up there for the work.
Wow, you could cue the angel sounds whenever you say that, talking about outfitting things here in Louisiana much more cost effectively.
Correct.
Up on
Yes,
the East Coast.
it's definitely more cost effective to do it here, and we get it. You know, it's a lot easier for us to have our hands on the equipment. You know, we work in conjunction with shipyards down here, vessel operators down here, and the regulatory institutions as well. It's very important. You know, as you'll see later, the Coast Guard plays a big role in this. So having people who know how to mobilize an A-frame and have the correct documentation and deck calculations and loadings and all of that good stuff is paramount and saves a lot of time, which equates to money, you know, in the operator world. We've run into some serious problems trying to do it up in the Northeast.
Thank you. Very, very well put. All right. And I should point out, while siting and permitting is going on in that first phase, almost, you know, practically at the same time, developers are engaging design companies, looking basically to not only help design the absolute, the bottom fixed structures that they'll need, but also the processes for the installation. They all play a part in that. And we have Ms. Sarah Gazizadeh currently muted. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Ms. Sarah. But would love to hear how you and Keystone play a part in this segment of the development.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Representative Orgeron, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and participating in this panel today. So Keystone Engineering is a multidisciplinary engineering company. It's been in the energy sector and offshore for over 30 years now. And we've been heavily involved in the offshore wind industry for over 15 years. Our involvement started with carbon trust competition in the UK, and we've been involved since early days of Cape Wind project. As you probably know, we designed the foundations for the first offshore wind farm in the US, Block Island Wind Farm. As you mentioned, Keystone is pretty much involved throughout the life cycle of the project, from the very early stages of feasibility and pre-FEED, all the way through FEED and detailed design, procurement, construction, and even commission and maintenance. At the very early stages, as the permitting and environmental studies are being performed, we provide a construction operation plan. We help with bid document prep. We help with desktop study, foundation suitability analysis at the very high level. And then we get into more detailed design. Our current and past project portfolio involves a wide variety of foundation types. Pretty much everything from monopile to three-legged, four-legged jackets, tripods, IBGS, Keystone's patented twisted jacket, suction bucket, and gravity base. And we're currently also involved with some offshore substation projects. We are helping out developers with bids for the East Coast lease areas currently. We're involved with high-level preliminary analysis, and as I said, desktop studies for foundation selection.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm definitely going to save a question about some of those foundation types, specifically to the Gulf of Mexico. But in the course of time, let me try to get around everybody. So as design is finalizing and siting and permitting is getting completed, they call upon somebody like Gulf Island and Mr. Bill Blanchard to say, we're going to need some serial production from you. We want them all, not the one-off customs, but we want identical structures to be built. So Mr. Bill Blanchard, tell us how y'all do it over there at Gulf Island.
Hey, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the kind words, Joe. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. As you alluded to, Gulf Island has been in the fabrication business for over 35 years now. Primarily, we're set up for offshore oil and gas and fabricated multitudes of offshore jackets, topsides, components, rolled tubulars over the years. I've been with Gulf Island about 21 years now and was actually managing the fab yard here in Houma for about 15 years and been in business development for about 3 years now. But going back to the Deepwater wind project, we were very successful building the foundations for the turbines on that project starting in 2015, completing in the summer of 2016. We worked very closely with Keystone Engineering. They were the design engineers for the turbine foundations, which were basically 4-pile jackets that we had built for many, many years, very similar to the offshore oil and gas structures. But, we took on the challenge. We had been chasing the offshore wind world up and down the East Coast for a number of years. So we were, very successful in reeling in the contract. It's a good work for us. It was roughly 5 individual components, 2-piece components, a lower jacket and an upper jacket that housed the transition piece for the turbine tower. So it was good structural fabrication that we were very excited to do down here in our facility in Houma. We have since chased a variety of different projects up and down the East Coast. It appears that some of that work is now sort of shifting over from the jacket foundations to the monopiles, which we may be able to compete in that market primarily on the top side, the transition pieces for the small structural components. So we're waiting to see how that unfolds moving forward. But we're also very interested in the substation platforms that we can provide our services to fabricate those components for the East Coast as well as the Gulf of Mexico. So we're very keen on learning more about the opportunities for the Gulf of Mexico. We see that is a really good fit for our facility here in Houma. We'd like to keep as many people as we can working in this area and not really set up facilities on the East Coast. We think that's going to be a challenge moving forward, but looking forward to today's conversation. So thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. All right, next we're going to move to transportation and installation section. And to speak on that behalf, we've got Mr. James Martin, currently muted. Please go ahead and unmute yourself. I know you're working in Michoud right here in New Orleans East for LM Wind, but please tell us about the great work that y'all doing at Michoud or at LM Wind up in New Orleans East right there around the corner.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So myself, I've been in wind since the late 90s and actually moved to Louisiana in 2010. Actually, the company, technology rotor company, recognized the opportunity that Louisiana offered. Fantastic logistics, obviously the NASA Michoud facility, and potential for Gulf of Mexico, as well as getting in for all of the East Coast development. So I'm currently representing LM Wind Power, which is a GE renewable energy company. Our turbines and rotors are actually in Block Island. So they are LM Wind Power blades designed by the team, part of the team here in New Orleans. So I represent a team of engineers, project managers based out of the tech center here. We've been designing and testing blades that are appropriate for the conditions in the US. We've recently qualified the Halliard X turbine, which is going to be the workforce platform for the East Coast of the States, and will be the vehicle that in turn lends itself to the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, a lot of great opportunity, both in supply chain and the Gulf. And I think the engineering work that we're doing, the work that we need to get from the load cases, the wind speeds, solving the challenges of the hurricane conditions is all stuff that we're actively engaged with here in New Orleans, here at the Tech Center. So yeah, we've got a really fascinating path ahead of us.
Thank you, James. Being involved in this long and being at the wind farm conference whenever the Haliade X 12 megawatt turbine was initially announced, and the way they explained it about the 6 megawatt turbine that's currently installed, version that was installed in Block Island, how that assembly line would be kind of cleaned up, production stopped to change for this new chassis was the word that they used. I knew big things were on the horizon, and then whenever I finally heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all did get one of the large blades at Michoud, and that was kind of like another. For me, that was like a whole nother level, knowing ports and infrastructures and challenges to be able to get these large components into ports, knowing that that a Haliade X the 12 megawatt 107 meter blade had been actually delivered to Michoud. I said, well, that's good. At least Louisiana's in the play, and now here we are talking about expanding into the Gulf of Mexico.
Exactly. I think not many people know that the world's largest offshore blade was actually manufactured here in New Orleans in 2015, and the team continued to support the most powerful rotors in the world, between here and the East Coast. So yeah, very, very exciting.
That's probably another sound that should have angel sounds with it. Just all that what's done in this particular market, how much is done in Louisiana, even though the vast majority of the focus has been Massachusetts, New Jersey, and down the eastern seaboard. All right, and after we do transportation and installation, of course, there's the day-to-day maintenance, and for that we have Mr. Robert Clemens with us at West Offshore. Going to talk about the great equipment that is going to be built in order to support the wind farms of tomorrow. Day-to-day operations. Go ahead, everybody.
Thank you, Representative, and like many of you, very honored to be invited to join this panel. Edison Schwest has been in business, like many companies on here, since 1960, so a very, very deep footprint in the state of Louisiana. We're an integrated company. In other words, our shipyard, we basically design, engineer, construct, and operate our own vessels. And because of that, I think it's one of the primary reasons that we were asked to, or we ultimately executed the first contract for a U.S. flag Jones Act compliant SOV. And I think if a lot of folks aren't familiar with an SOV, basically it's a special purpose built vessel specific for the long-term maintenance and repair, or the O&M, operation and maintenance of a wind farm. Of course, there's the upfront construction cycle of a wind farm, which could take from 6 months to 18 months, depending on many factors. But then, of course, that wind farm would be expected to be in operation for the next 18, 20, 25 years. And during that period, you have everything from the integrity management, the maintenance, checking of sensors, rotor, control box, and all the rest of it. And that is where a new construction special purpose built vessel, particularly built for comfort and workability, which is a big term in the industry. Deep hull with a lot of capability of remaining on station in a very stable manner, not just for comfort of passengers on board, but in order to transfer them safely onto a transition piece platform. So we're very proud to have executed that long-term contract, and obviously very interested in Northeast Coast business, bidding on a lot of work there, not only for new builds, but also viewing the wind industry as an adjacent industry to oil and gas, in terms of a very large fleet that can be dedicated to purpose in various segments or various phases of the wind farm project. Everything from the vessel of opportunity that you heard earlier in the seismic and survey section, through construction and MPSVs, anchor handlers for trenching, typical PSVs and FSVs for transporting goods, cargo, equipment, and even people in some cases. PSVs that are converted for purpose for what they call walk to work or commissioning support vessels. So there's a significant number of vessels that are, as you all know on this call, it's a very key industry within the state of Louisiana, and so not just for Edison Schwest Offshore, but for a number of the other vessel operators that call Louisiana home. I think we all are looking at Northeast Coast wind and the possibility of bringing the wind industry to the U.S. Gulf of Mexico as being a primary target adjacent industry to oil and gas, and very excited about it.
Well, thank you very much. With just about half of our allotted time going through all the introduction, it's great. It gives a great canvas for us to start on. And keep in mind for the roundtable, I'll ask possibly one of y'all a particular question to kick it off. But any of y'all that have any comments would like to chime in, please go ahead and do so. So going back to siting and permitting, Benton, the question I wanted to know from you is, when do you start getting requests? Kind of two parts. When do you start getting a request to start leasing, or how quickly is a company that rents your equipment dispatched after a lease sale goes through? And that's one half of my question is temporal. And the other one is the equipment of you've mentioned that different things like magnetometers, side scan sonars, the equipment for CPTs, and I don't want to get too technical, but I just want to know is the differential between what had been historically used for Gulf of Mexico oil and gas exploration, what's you sending up to the East Coast to be used equipment, and how much will that be used, that same equipment or any newer equipment be used back in Mexico for offshore?
So primarily, like I mentioned earlier, we get involved right after the permits are issued. Actually, when they know the permits are coming down the pipe, we'll typically get the calls. They'll start planning surveys. The first stage is normally geophysical, where they will actually go and map the ocean floor and really plan where they will ideally place the foundations. The next is geotechnical, where they actually go down with anything from an ROV that collects sediment samples to a CPT, which, as you mentioned, is a very high-tech, very expensive, heavy piece of equipment that takes very accurate sediment samples. And then all the while through that, they're constantly doing environmental type surveys, water quality, marine mammal observation, passive acoustics. The mammal world is a very highly regulated place.
Birds and bats. Don't forget the birds and the bats too.
Birds and the bats and everything else. Typically we get involved in stuff on the water or under it, but we do have equipment that helps with bird sighting and all that other good stuff as well. From an equipment standpoint, the offshore wind world, as it relates to geophysical, geotechnical, and environmental, they typically rent and we provide the whole gamut of what we have. From the vessel, we provide umbilical winches that are spooled with coax cable or fiber optic cable to communicate with the underwater equipment, whether it's sonar, magnetometer, sub-bottom profilers, or even an ROV or any other sonar or vehicle that they will deploy subsea. We also have A-frames that we will fix to the deck of a vessel, which will allow for the safe and efficient launch and recovery of that equipment. Acoustic positioning systems, ultra short baseline USBL systems, which track the equipment under the water and allow the surveyors to geo-reference back to exactly what they're mapping. They can pinpoint these things literally. As it relates to oil and gas, you know, it's really the same equipment. It's the same concept of what they're doing. When they put a platform out in the Gulf of Mexico, they have to do all the same type of survey. Basically, anytime you're going to fix anything to the ocean floor, you need a geotechnical sample, just as if you were going to build a house and pour a slab. It's very much the same principle. The difference that we see from our traditional oil and gas work is basically in the depth of water, right? So on the East Coast, we're typically dealing with a 200 to 300 meter max depth. In the Gulf of Mexico, we could be at 3,000 meters, which is not, about 10,000 feet is kind of the deepest we would go. So that's really the main difference. But the similarities are aplenty, it's the same, like I mentioned, same concept, same overall objective. And same method of execution, just usually in a smaller package.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment on that? If not, I'd like to go to Sarah and hear about bottom fixed structure designs. All right, Sarah, tell us about, you mentioned monopiles, and I think in my notes I put Europeans love monopiles. So and our monopile rolling capabilities in the Gulf in the U.S. as a whole are not as prevalent as in Europe. So I was always kind of looking for an excuse, whether it's on the East Coast and bigger turbines requiring a bigger footprint in order to get our Gulf of Mexico construction capabilities, which we'll talk with Bill in a bit. But on the design side, can you illuminate us on the differences, hard soil, soft soil, and the types of structures you see coming down the pipe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a very good question. And yes, due to softer soils in the Gulf of Mexico and most places, we can't really do monopile. Not that we can't, but it wouldn't probably be feasible due to very long pile embedment or leaning, which wouldn't work for wind turbine foundations. There are plenty of options that are currently being considered, but after monopiles, jackets are the most common type of offshore wind foundations that are being considered. They can be 3-legged or 4-legged, post-piled or pre-piled. For the case of Block Island Wind Farm, as you can see in the back, it was a post-piled project. This was special, built in 2 segments, jacket and deck. And this is, by the way, it's Bill's Gulf Island Fabrication Yard.
Yep.
Of course. Which is very similar to the oil and gas platforms. But the more common design for the jackets are pre-piled, and that's the European basically type of foundations, and that's mostly due to advantages for installation sequencing, that all the piles can be installed all at once, and then the jackets will be installed later. The other type of foundations that we're currently working on developing a concept is actually floating. As was mentioned earlier, the Gulf drops very significantly. So for pretty much anything more than 60 meter or about 200 feet or so, we're looking at like floating options, and floating concepts have been getting a lot of attention since the lease areas for California were identified. So yeah, all those options are on the table.
And north of Nantucket. So as you go to Maine, for instance, there is no shelf, just like California. So they're all very interested in floating technology. So how about suction buckets? That's something that spars and other deep water facilities in the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of them have used suction pile anchors and things like that. So in the deep water. So I'm just wondering, continued development on structures that would be bottom fixed, that have basically suction bucket cans at each pile point to be able to sit down and be be firmly attached to the soil. That's in the design space.
Yeah, absolutely. Although there hasn't been a lot of wind farms designed with the suction buckets, currently the experience is very limited in the offshore wind space. But yeah, definitely suction bucket and also gravity-based structures, which are currently being looked at for East Coast, like northern parts. So yeah, they're definitely the concepts that we're looking at. But as I said, jackets are pretty much the second common after monopiles.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you very much, Bill.
Nice.
I'm gonna jump to you if you don't mind.
Sure.
You know, as you hear Louisiana and softer soils and possibly jackets becoming more, I guess that's music to your ears, right? And my main concern is with the downturn in the oil and gas industry that we had, and knowing not only, you know, whether Gulf Island was involved or not, but shipyards releasing a lot of laborers, buying properties, selling properties, a lot of changes in the whole fabrication market on the Gulf Coast with that downturn. Should offshore wind come to Louisiana and pick up? How do you see places like Gulf Island? Would we be able to ramp up? Is the latent knowledge of pipe fitters, welders, and all for serial construction there?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. Appreciate it. Yeah, when we look at the opportunities in the Gulf of Mexico, there's certainly you know, some ample work that would be associated with gearing or retooling your facility to meet the needs for multiple components to be built, especially for jacket construction or fabrication, because a typical wind farm that we're seeing on the East Coast has got anywhere from 45 to 50 components. And what we have done traditionally over the years for the oil and gas industry is built one-off jackets or one-off platforms where it was specifically designed for a certain area and location within the Gulf of Mexico. But when you're looking at wind farms, and I'm assuming it would be similar in the Gulf of Mexico as they are on the East Coast, there would be multiple components. So it would be what you would call serial production or serial manufacturing. So you may have to look at retooling your facility to accommodate that, where you may be outsourcing some of the components to other fabricators or other areas within the supply chain, and bringing in the components and doing more of an assembly facility within your yard. A lot of these jacket components, specifically the ones that we built for the Block Island project, everything was built here within our facility in Houma. Especially the jackets, the piles we had outsourced and sort of assembled the piles here, but you're going to be looking at a large number of components to be built in a short period of time. So space is going to be critical. Your shops are going to be critical, and your whole manufacturing process are going to have to be re-looked at and retooled to accommodate the large number of components that are going to be needed to be built for a wind farm in the Gulf of Mexico. The other question that I think you threw at me was, you know, the skilled labor. It'll certainly be a challenge. Basically, the jacket fitters, the jacket welders, those personnel, you know, have sort of moved on from the current industry. So we'd have to bring them back or retrain people to do that. So we'd be looking to maybe get some assistance from the state or federal government or whatever to accommodate that. I know one of the key things that we're seeing on the East Coast, especially up in the Northeast states, is they're mandating that you have local content requirements within the fabrication. And it looks like all the components of the entire wind farm, the turbines, the cables, the foundations, they're all pointing to the foundation supplier to supply that local content, which would be great down here in the Gulf of Mexico, because that's what we do. So the more local content we can capitalize on, the better for us. We just have to gear up and get some additional personnel in here and retrain them associated with serial production. But it's certainly an opportunity we're looking at and hoping that things will come to the Gulf of Mexico like we're expecting.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, you brought something to my attention, that whether it's a mariner that I speak to that in the downturn said he would let his Coast Guard credentials go, or a pipe fitter or welder that could lay a beautiful bead on a joining that tells me, yeah, now I'm doing finishing work, interior cabinetry with my brother-in-law. So I think it's important that the quicker we could get this moving, the better off we can be able to continue to hold on to these people in this job, in this knowledge space. So, and one small critique on what you said about all the components of the Block Island foundations being built. Didn't we also y'all built some formed out some of the handrails and some ladders to the East Coast?
We did.
Maybe not quite as cost effectively built as in Louisiana.
Yeah, that's a good point. We part of our contract was to supply some local content within the Block Island project. So we had to farm out some of the small tertiary steel fabrication, which was some ladders and some handrails, things like that we sort of cut, coped, and put on a truck and sent up there. And we had the welders up there assemble it. Then they sent it back down here and we coated it, finished it all up and put it on the platform. So they did have some local content, but it was minimal and it was pretty expensive. So what we found, even trying to do some work on the East Coast, is there are some challenges working up there with the union labor, with the lack of experience, and with the different ports and facilities that really aren't suited for that type of construction on the East Coast, where we feel Gulf Island and the Gulf of Mexico fabricators are better suited to do that type of work down here with the experience, training, and the experienced personnel that we currently have.
I saw Harry nodding, because offline he and I have many conversations on policy about how to best move this along, not put a lot of these very restrictive local content concepts into contracting as we move forward. That sometimes they work against you or just basically inflate costs here. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to Mr. James Martin. Thank you, Bill, at LM Wind. And as we look towards the Gulf of Mexico, I remember being at a wind farm conference probably 8 years ago, and it might have been one of the 3 offshore wind manufacturers. It wasn't GE, I can tell you that. But them saying, if we never put a turbine up in the Gulf of Mexico, I think I'll be happy, because seeing our brand name on a nacelle with broken blades after a hurricane would just break our heart, So that's always been a conversation that's stuck in my mind. But I know that with Asia Pac expanding and them having typhoons and slightly lower wind speeds like what we have in the Gulf as compared to the persistent winds of the East Coast and the West Coast, please enlighten us on all the great things blade design and new developments in material science are providing us to maybe make more resilient blade structures or turbines for the Gulf.
Absolutely, and just leading into that, I'll just pick up from where Bill left off, and the point that these are the largest serial production composite components on the planet, pretty much. And with a typical array of turbines being maybe 10 by 10, so 100 structures, plus you've got, if just behind me, almost 100% of the world's turbines are these 3-blade upwind components. So it means the wind passes through the nacelle into the generator, through the hub into the generator. You've got a lot of challenges. So this is about 25 to 30% of the capital investment for the turbine is the rotor. And to your point, these things have to be robust. They're designed with upwards of 20 to 40 year life now. And again, a company like LM Wind Power, we're designing 10 to 12 new blade products per year. So depending on the various site conditions around the planet, to take your point of Asia Pacific, obviously there's a lot of typhoons. So the typhoon variant, firstly with regulation, with the IEC typhoon variant certification, and then in the response, LM Wind Power designing a blade that had that resilience. So you choose, and again, the center here in New Orleans, we innovate. So we take innovation to product, we choose the right materials, we do the right structural design, we design the right aerodynamics for the wind conditions, and create a product that's got that robustness that can be tested to 200 mile per hour winds, that can be over-designed and actually have that robustness to get through the full life cycle. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on with the Gulf of Mexico specifically, because it is As we just talked about, it's a low wind site with high gust loads. Turbines tend to cut in at a certain wind speed. So the ones on the East Coast, for example, might have a cut in at about 7.5 meters per second, which times 2.2 takes you to miles per hour. And they have a cut out of maybe 25 meters per second. So again, 56 miles an hour. For the Gulf Coast, we just need to work together. I think all of the skill sets that exist on the Gulf Coast with oil and gas, we build the load case, we get the data, we understand what wind conditions are, what the stability conditions are with the sea state, and we design a rotor that's appropriate for the Gulf of Mexico. So again, hopefully that the comment, we don't want to see blades, that are the root cause of any stoppages, but we're very, very confident we're heading in the right direction with the work we're doing here at Tech Center and NASA in LM Wind Power, but also all the learnings we're getting from having those blades spinning on the East Coast and having actually over 100,000 turbines that LM Wind Power have been powering over the years to get that data and ensure we keep quality.
Well, I think whenever you had me, whenever you said some of the largest serially produced products on the planet, and I know the building that you're in, and historically I knew the external fuel tank for the space shuttle built in that same Michoud facility. So again, Louisiana's ground zero for bigger and better things for the future. So thank you very much for that. So moving into the operations and maintenance and kind of looking towards East Coast versus Gulf of Mexico. Robert, if you don't mind, I know that you and I both have some experiences with CTVs as well. East Coast Europe had used them historically as short day trips for the technicians. Now at Suez, of course, you're going to have that very cost-effective loitering field vessel that'll stay there and provide walk to work for them to check sensors and do routine maintenance. Whenever I should also point out the question I have is our underutilized and abundant number of lift boats that we have in the Gulf of Mexico that were used not only in the construction for Block Island and in foundation and feedering, but even though I wasn't directly involved in it, after the turbines were turned up for commissioning, they actually tried to do some repairs with CTVs back and forth, and were not making proper repair time as quickly as possible. So they called up another lift boat to go and park itself at the structure to get turbine number 4 in Block Island online. So the question I have is, you mentioned really briefly about the vessel assets, PSVs being repurposed and stuff. Can you illuminate us on what you think about lift boats being used for field and service vessels, as well as Gulf of Mexico crew boats? Because I got some mutual friends of ours. Why don't they just put regular Gulf of Mexico boat landings with swing ropes on it? We can back down to them as we did. I'm trying to explain to them that the European players in the process frown upon that, as well as personnel baskets. So anything you could illuminate on that subject, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I can certainly try, and I tell you, with there's so many subjects that have been touched on, from local content to floating versus fixed BOP. I mean, we I think could talk for probably 5 or 6 days on some of these subjects. But specific to your question, there's a lot of evolving technology, and it all surrounds. When it comes to transferring personnel, it really surrounds the safe transfer of individuals. So you're seeing some of the main developers, one in particular that's looking for an alternative system rather than pushing a CTV onto a wind turbine laddering system, having fall protection, but then having to still climb up a ladder. Instead, having the ability to land them onto a transition piece landing platform, which is anywhere from 20 to 25 meters above mean waterline. So there's definitely going to be a home for CTVs and for the aluminum shipyards in Louisiana. I think that is a significant potential opportunity. But CTVs are small craft, and although they are very stable, because we don't know exactly where these wind farms are going to be located. You don't want individuals transiting on small CTVs for very long distances. One, that's time that these technicians could be using on a individual turbine, but also it's not exactly the most comfortable ride. So a smaller
physiological fatigue, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So FSV becomes a potential repurposed asset for some of these, for what the role of a CTV would undertake. And specific to your question on lift boats, that's an interesting question, because I think a lot of folks are overlooking the importance of lift boats and the huge volume of vessels in all classes that can be brought to bear on particularly the O&M or on the O&M phase, long-term cycle of a wind farm development project, but on all phases. And everything from coring samples to transition piece maintenance before the tower is installed. There's lots of small segments that people aren't, they may not be exposed to the full process of EPC, of the construction of a wind farm, and the highly programmed nature of both the construction phase as well as the long-term O&M. They have some similarities but differences. But yes, I think the lift boats definitely have a home, because they have high accommodation and capacity. It's a stable working platform. They have crane capacity, but then you also have the PSVs. A lot of people don't realize generators are maintained on board. They need to be refueled. So small to mid-size, even large in some cases, PSVs and FSVs will be brought into service. So and I think it's just worth noting that. And I know I'm going to stay in my lane a little bit here on O&M, but for the full wind farm development, Louisiana has everything. Louisiana has the infrastructure. As we've heard, there's been a lot of technology that's gone into blade manufacturing, and particularly resistance to or the high tolerance to hurricanes. But what a lot of people don't realize is Louisiana's infrastructure is already set up with the levee system to get back to work, whether it's to inspect or re-inspection following a hurricane, but we're able to get back to work so much faster than anywhere else in the world, frankly. We have the resources, the infrastructure, the shipyards, the fabrication facilities, the technical knowledge and know-how. And yes, Bill is spot on when he says that we're all struggling for people with a hands-on welding, fitting capability, but we have the technical knowledge. We do need the people, we can train them. And so I see that as a minor hurdle for us to eventually get over.
Thank you, Robert. As you said, all the topics that we touched on, we could probably call it for the whole other hour, but there is another panel that we have to move the floor off. I think, Harry, if you've gotten any questions from the audience.
We do have several questions, and we'll try and squeeze them in. But yeah, fully agree that we could spend a week or more just diving into the details. Yes. Excellent discussion. We have a question from Jason Longclough. With the continued deployment in the Northeast and lessons learned, are there any specific challenges for fabrication and design in the Gulf of Mexico that are unique? Perhaps we touched on that a little bit with the hurricanes. And then a follow-up question, what is the most important thing the state and policymakers can do to support this work? And so maybe focusing on that second, if anybody has ideas, selfishly, you're working for the state, if you have ideas that we can share with, while we have time.
Right. This for me or
anybody wants to jump in.
Well, on the policy, I mean, I was approached in the last legislative session to look for, the normal tax incentives for green jobs and stuff like that. But of course, the whole mantra of the last fiscal session was, of course, reducing rates and trying to make Louisiana more competitive from neighboring states. So some of that was shelved for a future session. I know I did see one question that I thought was interesting. If you don't mind me posing it to James, and that was, I think Mr. Charles Nelson asked about blade designs on fixed bottom versus, and what his focus is on floating structures. Is there anything that goes in differently to if you're going to be putting a turbine on a floating structure that needs to be considered with the additional moments and things like that?
Absolutely. And it's a great question, and one that the industry is treating very seriously, not just for floating, but the larger the structures, depending on, it could be even from onshore. These large structures on onshore, whether it's a direct drive or whether it's actually got a high and low speed system. So yeah, it's a very, very key area. And a lot of the government labs, both NREL, Sandia, are spending a lot of time on this. So there's a lot of PhDs, a lot of very, very experienced engineers that are applying themselves to this very field and to help to support the OEMs. So obviously a lot of the OEMs focus is on execution, actually delivering the product, designing it. And an area that we really need to work on around the Gulf is around those load cases, around the wind conditions, and strong association with the universities, with the government labs, with and with areas such as Keystone, GE, LM Wind Power, and all of the supporting capacity we have to solve these problems. But it's a very good question, and it's something that's very pertinent for especially offshore and especially for floating, which is, it's a very small proportion of the world's footprint of wind energy. And certainly with our Gulf Coast, we've got lots of fantastic shallow water, or deemed as less than 60 meters from the BOEM and the NREL studies. So we really want, my personal opinion is that would be really exhausting the less than 60 meters. So the units that Sarah was talking about at Keystone, but floating is a very interesting area that a lot of people are watching carefully.
Hearing you talk about the direct drive versus transmission makes me think physics-wise all the way down that y'all gonna have to have like a different, possibly a serial number for those that are, or model number for those that are on floating, for all the things that are just not as fixed bottom structured and static. That's an interesting. All right, I know Harry, you asked me to try to wrap it up as quickly as possible.
I'm gonna try and squeeze in one more question for Sarah, because it came up a few times earlier this week, but about repurposing existing oil and gas rigs, and just kind of whether is it kind of easier said than done? Has it been looked into or tried out in the North Sea or elsewhere? Kind of, what are your thoughts?
Yes, so it's definitely possible, and it may be more efficient to repurpose the offshore oil and gas platforms for offshore substation rather than wind turbine foundations. It needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis in order to make sure that the foundations can withstand the wind turbine loading. And if there would be a need for retrofit or a temporary supports. But just from the very high level analysis and evaluations that have been done, it's definitely possible from a technical standpoint, but as I said, it needs to be evaluated on a case by case basis.
All right.
All right. I think that wraps it. Any final thoughts, comments? Well, I will just thank you all for being on this panel. Really not enough time to do it justice, but I think we really scratched the surface. I think there was a lot of important points that were made. I think the audience learned a lot. I learned a lot. Hopefully we can continue this conversation together, whether it's out in the field, checking out our capabilities, or other panels like this. But I just want to thank you all for your participation and time.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. James,
Thank
Ben,
you.
Bill, Sarah.
And I hope you can all stay on and kind of listen in. I'm going to do a line change kind of one by one, but so just hold with it for just a few minutes.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, they are. Sorry about that.
All good. We were just doing a line change between our first and second panel, so just making sure. I think we have everybody, but let me just double check that. All right, I do think we have everybody on the panel, and we'll move some other folks off in just a minute. But I don't want to waste any time because there's a lot to dig into, and so I just want to reintroduce our panelists. We'll have Brad Lambert, Deputy Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development, serve as our moderator for this second panel, which is really kind of zooming out a little bit from this first panel, which engaged market participants and really looking at kind of what are some regional, national trends, economic trends, what are our port capacities, and how can kind of state and local federal government help support the development of offshore wind and the supply chain component of that in Louisiana. And so our panelists include Michael Hecht, President and CEO of GNO Inc., Christy Lumpkin, Economic Development Director for Lafourche Parish, Richard Self, Executive Director, Port of Lake Charles, Chet Chasson, Executive Director, Port Fourchon, Claire Marceau, Port Director at Cameron Port Harbor and Terminal District, and Terry Chambers, Director of Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Center at University of Louisiana Lafayette. I believe I still need to grab Chet Chasson, but I'll turn it over to you, Brad, while I do that.
Hey, thanks so much, Harry. It's great to see everybody on the screen, and thanks to all our attendees for sticking with us for a second hour. Really, basically, our panel is charged with wrapping up Wind Week. We've heard a lot of great discussion over the last 5 days, and we'll aim to close the week out on a high note. Since we are the last panel, we're just going to jump right in. I have some opening questions for all our distinguished panelists, and we will certainly try to get to as many questions that appear in the chat or the Q&A as the remaining time allows. I am super appreciative and very grateful to work with all of these panelists. They do an outstanding job advocating for their communities, for their stakeholders, and really the entire state of Louisiana. For their service, Louisiana is extremely fortunate. I'll start in the southeastern portion of the state and move westward, just really kind of go around the virtual table, so to speak, before closing kind of our prepared structure with Professor Chambers. So as Harry said, Michael Hecht is the president and CEO of Greater New Orleans, Inc., one of our 8 regional economic development organizations in the state. With an entrepreneurial background, he has spent some time actually at Louisiana Economic Development early in his career. He holds an undergraduate degree from Yale and an MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business. Michael, GNO Inc. has been at the forefront of pursuing offshore wind opportunities for and in Louisiana. Can you tell us why GNO Inc. is so bullish on offshore wind?
Thank you, Brad. And you know, of all my education, the real education happened at Louisiana Economic Development. That was a school of hard knocks, right?
Absolutely.
I'll tell you a story sometime. Look, we're so big on wind energy because we have real competitive advantages here. And we also know that it's a globally expanding industry. So if you see a globally expanding industry that we have real credibility in, that's exciting. And the environmental benefits just kind of add a whole nother level to this. So if I had to kind of go down and list what I think really our advantages are, first, obviously, it's 70 plus years of offshore oil and gas experience, which gives us a tremendous advantage in terms of our workforce, in terms of our engineering prowess, and in terms of a tradition of innovation and safety relative to working with large structures to generate energy offshore. We're an energy state fundamentally, and so a transition in terms of skills or workforce from offshore oil and gas to offshore wind is a very natural one. The second one is more about our potential. According to studies, Louisiana has the fourth highest potential of any U.S. state for offshore wind. And so you put those two things together, it means that right now we have an opportunity through our experience and expertise to be building and servicing structures everywhere, including the East Coast of the United States. That's the immediate opportunity. And we know that Louisiana companies are already building and servicing wind structures outside of Louisiana. But then the second opportunity is going to be the actual deployment of wind in the Gulf of Mexico, where we are number 4 in the country. And then I add to that the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere with ample site options, our low-cost business environment, including already the 4th lowest utility rates in the country, top workforce training programs, and frankly, a business community and an economic development community and a political leadership that is as nimble and unified as any in the country. You put all that together, and I think that we're in a really good position to lead in wind energy, offshore wind energy, to benefit not just Louisiana, but the country.
That's a great summary, Michael, and we certainly heard from some of those companies on the panel that just preceded us that have done work in Block Island, that are trying to do work in the East Coast projects that are under development right now, and that really want to do work, hopefully, when we get to that phase in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll turn next to Christy Lumpkin. Christy is currently the Grants and Economic Development Director for Lafourche Parish. She has held numerous economic development positions, both in North Louisiana as well as Southwest Louisiana, and has also worked at LED. Christy, you are located in a parish environment with a deep oil and gas history. Can you provide our audience with kind of a Bayou region perspective on what pursuit of offshore wind projects in state waters or in the federal outer continental shelf might mean for your parish and your Bayou region?
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to participate today. There would be a number of benefits to the Bayou region. Number one, it could lead to thousands of jobs being created in a number of different fields, including manufacturing, construction, engineering, maintenance, just to name a few. Would also create some industry diversification throughout the Bayou region. We've also got existing skill sets that developers could utilize as they relate to our successful offshore projects, including our extensive knowledge through the energy sector itself. We've also got the expertise and availability of our existing industry support sectors, such as transportation and logistics. Developers could also tap into our knowledge of the local waterways, the Gulf of Mexico, including ways to work successfully within the Bayou region environment. Offshore wind development would also showcase the Bayou region's ability to support the coexistence of much needed oil and gas while embracing the renewable energy sectors. So ultimately, the Bayou region has the talent, the resources, the expertise, the supplies, and the suppliers to make offshore wind development a success for all of those involved.
Christy, I think you just touched on something there that just kind of raises, again, this all of the above approach to energy. As Michael said, Louisiana is an energy state, and I think will always be an energy state, and we're well positioned in this transition phase that we find ourselves in to both expand our energy options as well as reduce emissions. And that's an important factor, I think, for us to keep in mind here. I'll move to Chet Chasson. He's been the executive director at Port Fourchon for almost 16 years. Chet, it's great to see you. He holds a master's of public administration from LSU, a program that is near and dear to my heart since I am also an LSU MPA graduate. Chet, you represent a port with tremendous experience, expertise, capability for fabrication and service providers. Can you kind of talk about Port Fourchon tenants, their service, what's currently occurring in the domestic offshore wind industry, and two, what would it mean for Port Fourchon if developers begin to pursue offshore wind projects in state and federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico?
Thank you for having me, Brad. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks to all the panelists too for being on here. It's happy to be with all of you. You have to look at it from purely a supply chain capability. I mean, if you're doing offshore wind, if you're doing offshore energy as a whole, you have to have the supply chain to actually do it. And we have that for oil and gas. Currently, many of our tenants and customers and users of Port Fourchon are the ones that are operating in the Northeast and trying to assist. I mean, your panel, the first panel earlier today talked about all of that. I mean, there's vessels being built. There are current vessels that can handle the services of the Northeast. Dr. Joe Ogeron was working up there. He talked a lot about that. So the expertise, the workforce, the capability to do the things necessary for offshore wind is pretty much the same thing we have for the oil and gas industry. So as we move forward in looking at the potential for offshore wind in the Gulf of Mexico, I think it just enhances the capability and shows how Louisiana, and in particular Port Fourchon and its tenants and users, can adapt to a changing approach to how we provide energy to the country, but at the same time understanding that the balanced approach, the all of the above approach, is the only way that this is going to succeed. Because and I'll just say it because I always say it when I talk about this is, we can't build the windmill and the solar panel without petroleum products. So we have to understand that a balanced approach is the only way to move forward. And offshore wind, if it's here in the Gulf of Mexico, and we hope it is, and we see leases potentially in the next couple of years, we can start to see some activity, and it'll allow us to continue to work and build better and stronger and have a balanced energy portfolio in our country.
Yeah, Chet, I would keep saying that line. It's important for people to hear it and recognize that so much of the energy for the rest of the country comes from the Gulf of Mexico, and we've developed a lot of energy independence, but we export a lot of energy from our area here. I'll turn to Claire and Ricky. Claire Marceau has been the port director at Cameron Port, Harbor, and Terminal District since May of 2016. She has a tremendous breadth of experience in economic development, disaster recovery, and she's also been a high school English teacher. Ricky has spent the last 18 years at the Port of Lake Charles, including the last year as executive director. It's great to see both of you guys. And I'll kind of pose the same question to both of you, and you can kind of put your own kind of localization to it. But again, your two ports, the Cameron Port and the Port of Lake Charles, you're the closest ports to what the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, with those studies have indicated are the most promising locations for offshore wind turbines in that western portion of the Gulf of Mexico. Can you share your perspective on what offshore wind development might mean for Southwest Louisiana? And Claire, I'll turn it over to you first.
Ricky and I had agreed he was going to go first, but I will. I'm happy to. So absolutely, we thank you from the Cameron Parish Port Harbor and Terminal District for allowing us to participate in this very important conversation. And so to lead up to what I think it means, I would say that because of our experience here in Cameron Parish with traditional oil and gas and the infrastructure that exists here, along with deep water access and our shallow water immediately offshore, couple that with extremely high support from our population, our stakeholders, our everyday citizens for the vital role that we play in the energy industry, that leads to tremendous project success, which we've seen time and time again here in Southwest Louisiana. And we have exceptional relationships with the global maritime industry, which I think is going to absolutely segue into what we see happen in the future with alternative energy sources. And I think most importantly, as you mentioned, Brad, that data from the study that you referenced indicates the highest and most consistent offshore winds along our coast are located from Sabine Pass to Calcasieu Pass, which is Cameron Parish, which means the Cameron Parish Port Harbor and Terminal District. And so we also have a robust transmission system on our coast here in Cameron Parish, which means that there would be a ready-made and the capacity for tie-in for these systems that we've been discussing all week, which is certainly very exciting for us and our energy utility providers. And then I would also say that the support of diversification of our energy economy for not only our port commissioners that I'm responsible to report to, and to our people here in Cameron Parish, that for us is something that we're very interested to see come to fruition, is that relationship that we build with the developers of these projects. And we certainly have capacity. So I would say what it means for us is continued support of our nation's energy independence coming from right here in Cameron Parish. And I would turn it over to Ricky and certainly see what he has to add.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry about that. We did talk about me going first, but that's all right.
We're adaptable. It happens.
That's right. Yeah, I want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to discuss the economic impact and really the supply chain capabilities of offshore wind and the impact for Southwest Louisiana. You know, some of the studies have shown a single offshore wind project will create, upwards of 4,500 jobs, 45 million in GDP, along with 150 jobs and 14 million in GDP annually. Offshore wind was found, which was really kind of an interesting fact that I saw, is that offshore wind will offer 508 gigawatts, and that's twice the energy currently consumed in the Gulf states. The great news for Louisiana is that, as was mentioned earlier, a recent study concluded that when you consider all the U.S. states and considering only those sites with average winds with 7 meters or greater, Louisiana is in the top 4. But the other point is, and Michael mentioned this earlier, Louisiana is in the top 4, but 3 of the top 4 are Gulf states. It's Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. Again, I believe the Calcasieu Ship Channel and the Port of Lake Charles are in a very promising location because of the winds in the Western Gulf. And we are an energy port. This will just add to our mix. We actually currently handle blades for windmills. These blades are in the 40 to 62 meter range. So far, we've handled about 1,300 blades, 204 of the tower sections. These blades are coming in from India and Spain currently, and they primarily depart by rail to the Midwest. We have space for these components. Currently, we handle these at the City Docks location. However, the new offshore blades that we're seeing are going to be in the range of 107 meters, and that's really, really large. The tower units will be approximately 248 meters, And the conversion of that is about 813 feet. So when installed, they're going to be significantly bigger and taller than the ones that we've been seeing. Another interesting point is the fact that, one rotation of these larger components, larger windmill blades, will create enough power to power a household for 2 days, which was really kind of an interesting fact I noticed as well. Really, as far as the impact for our area, I think it's going to create a lot of jobs, a lot of manufacturing jobs. And one of the benefits for Louisiana also is that because these components are so much larger than the ones that we're currently handling, they will most likely require a location, and the location would really get into the manufacturing and construction of the blades themselves. And again, I believe with our close proximity to some of the more promising locations of offshore wind, we're really just ideally suited for this initiative. In fact, we recently commissioned a study for the offshore wind with Moffitt Nickel. We're looking at really two types of facilities. One of them is a wind turbine marshaling facility. That type of facility would receive blades and turbines and the tower sections from a fabrication site. Those components would then be staged and pre-assembled and loaded out onto a vessel, which then transits to the offshore site. The second type of facility we're looking at is actually the fabrication site. The fabrication facility will manufacture the blades, the tower sections, transition pieces, and the foundations, and then actually load them out to the marshaling facility. Again, the raw materials used in the production of the components will be delivered by truck and rail to the fabrication facility, and then we would also require offshore support vessels. So really, I guess just to conclude, I'd like to conclude by saying that we're very excited about the opportunity. We're an energy port already. We believe Louisiana certainly benefit from the Gulf offshore wind, but I also want to echo what Chet had said. It's going to take a balanced approach, but I do believe we are positioned well for this initiative. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Ricky. I really appreciate your comments. And before going to Dr. Chambers, Claire, I want to come back. I'll take a moderator's privilege here, and I want to see if you can build on something that you mentioned. And you mentioned, I grabbed a phrase out of what you said, we have the ability to execute. And you guys have seen a fairly new part of the energy industry from kind of beginning to end with the LNG projects, Cheniere, Sempra, now Venture Global. Kind of from a planning, construction, operations, what have you seen? And then what has it meant from an economic impact on your parish to have a new component of the energy industry happen in Southwest Louisiana? And so I guess what I'm getting at is if we can do it with LNG, we can do it with offshore wind as well.
Absolutely, Brad. And thank you for the question. So what you asked is, I think, critical to this conversation as well. And by that, I mean, we've been at this for quite some time. Cheniere Energy at their Sabine Pass facility broke ground actually in 2003 with their import facility. So our port district has seen both import and export licensing take place with Cheniere Energy Sabine Pass facility, and then with Cameron LNG's facility in Hackberry. We've also seen, as you mentioned, Venture Global and their Calcasieu Pass facility here as well. We saw an industry that many of the stakeholders, quite frankly, had never encountered before, although we were very familiar with natural gas pipelines and have, quite frankly, perhaps the densest natural gas pipeline network, certainly in North America. And we had a workforce that was familiar with the intersection of our coast and offshore development for traditional oil and gas, which played very well into some of the things that we've heard earlier this week about workforce and their capacity to not only be prepared immediately, but to also learn new skills and be trained based on what they were already doing, sort of propelling them with programs like Fast Start. And so I guess the bottom line of what I would say is we have, just as we've adapted with every natural disaster that we've encountered, we've paid close attention We've grown with every challenge and seen it as an opportunity. I think that's why you see 7 now liquefied natural gas exporters that, to include Sabine Pass, Cameron LNG, Venture Global, Commonwealth, Monkey Island LNG, G2 Net Zero, the floating liquefaction facility, Delphin. They see that we understand and comprehend the value of their CapEx in our port district and what it means globally. We're exporting to more than 60 countries now from Cameron Parish, and Cameron Parish is the 3rd largest exporter of liquefied natural gas among nations. So we've proven over and over again that we can take what is relatively a new industry and prove that we can successfully partner with these projects. Everything from their waterway suitability assessment to the time that they actually export the product. And we're ready to do the same thing with wind energy.
Ricky, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to echo, again, what Claire had said as far as some of the LNG projects. I mean, we're an energy port. We're currently exporting petroleum coke. We have a lot of refineries here locally, and I think LNG is a great market for us. We will be working with the wind energy and look forward to those opportunities as well.
Thank you guys for kind of that impromptu off script, but I think it was important to realize that, Claire, as you said, we've done it over and over again in Louisiana. Dr. Terry Chambers holds an endowed chair in the Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and also is the director of the Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Center at ULL. He holds undergraduate and doctorate degrees from Brigham Young University. Dr. Chambers, thanks so much for sticking with us as we kind of wrap this first round of questions. And I really want you to, kind of address how have and how can Louisiana's higher education institutions contribute to this hopefully new offshore wind effort in the Gulf of Mexico and really the overall pursuit of renewable energy in general. And I'll ask you to address that both from a research and development standpoint, as well as Claire has alluded to, the workforce development standpoint. So again, thanks for being with us.
You're on mute.
I think, yep, just unmute yourself, Doctor.
Thank you very much for having me. I do think that there is a significant role for our institutions of higher education in the state of Louisiana to really contribute to the development of offshore wind and to create the trained workforce that is necessary to help promote this economic development that we've been talking about. Of course, the role of universities is twofold, the education and the research and development. So we perform R&D to answer questions of how you can make renewable energy economically viable in Louisiana, take technology that works elsewhere and make it work here, and to train the renewable energy professionals such as attorneys, economists, business leaders, engineers, and geologists, and so on. And then the technical and community colleges will need to train the technicians that will do a lot of the manufacturing, installation, operation, and maintenance, and so on. We do have some areas of strength in Louisiana in our higher education. As Michael mentioned, we have 70 years of excellence in oil and gas, and our existing educational infrastructure has been fine-tuned to help support those operations. And many of those skills are transferable, but I think we need to show a willingness to change our mindset from the mindset that we're an oil and gas state to saying we're an energy state with an all of the above type approach in our educational programs as well as our businesses. So we do have strength in higher ed in terms of manufacturing. We have the National Center for Advanced Manufacturing at the Michoud facility in New Orleans. It's already been mentioned. which is a partnership between NASA, the state of Louisiana, LSU, and UNO. Louisiana Tech University also currently leads a $20 million NSF-funded Louisiana Materials Design Allowance or Alliance called Lambda to transform research and education in advanced manufacturing and materials throughout the state. And that Lambda Alliance includes La Tech, Louisiana State, Southern, Tulane, and the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. We have strength in law, economics, and policy. LSU and Tulane both have a law school and an energy institute, which gives them expertise in renewable energy law, economics, policy, landmen, project developers, and so on. In terms of renewable energy technology, the Energy Institute of Louisiana and the College of Engineering at UL Lafayette focus on the technical aspects of renewable energy, including solar, wind, biofuels and chemicals, battery storage, and hydrogen. But what I think that we lack are renewable energy specific degree programs. As I said, our educational programs have really been fine-tuned to support the oil and gas industry, and there needs to be an adjustment to be able to really support the wind industry. SLCC, some years back, they created a renewable energy technician program, but it was a program that was really, in my opinion, developed before its time, and there weren't enough jobs at that time for its graduates. But now I think that the landscape has changed, and we need to ramp up our ability to provide the graduates that industry needs. On a related note, but not exactly the same, within the last year, UL Lafayette created a renewable energy minor in the College of Engineering. And SLCC does currently have an industrial marine electronics technology program to train remotely operated vehicle technicians. But I perceive that we need more renewable energy courses and programs to be developed. In the area of solar, for example, UL Lafayette has recently developed 5 renewable energy technician training programs, and we're in the process of building a training facility for solar installers. And we're looking to partner with a community college that wants to create a renewable energy technician program, and we can train their faculty and help them scale up the program and deploy it across the state. And I feel like we need to do the same kind of thing for wind technicians as well. But I think that we are a little bit behind the curve. There was a question in the Q&A from an NREL researcher identifying a need for more fundamental research in Louisiana in the specific area of wind, and I agree with that. And this is something that we need to remedy.
Good. Thank you for that comprehensive approach. And it sounds like maybe there's an opportunity for us collectively to go to the Board of Regents and build on some of the things that you've mentioned, Dr. Chambers, and certainly I know a lot of stakeholders, some of us here on this panel would be willing to do that. Harry, I don't know what your pleasure is. If there are some things that you're seeing in the chat or the Q&A that you want to raise, and we can certainly try to address those. I also have a couple follow-ups, but why don't we try to address anything that may be coming up from our attendees? Sure, and I think some of them were asked and answered, but I want to make sure that they're visible to everybody. One of our attendees asked, what are some of the expected impacts of offshore wind on state revenue, particularly in the context of the RISE Act, which was recently introduced, co-sponsored or co-authored by Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy and Senator Whitehouse as well. And that would, in addition to lifting the cap for Go Mesa and expanding eligible leases and raising the impact assistance to 50% for oil and gas, it would also increase to 50% any revenue from offshore wind. So really would be a boon for Louisiana and its coastal protection and restoration efforts across the coast. So really important piece of legislation that
I think we all need in South Louisiana to really engage and support us very strongly. And then there's also another, there's a post about a national supply chain study that is being conducted. And I just want to make sure, for any of the, actually we have Ross Gould with the, with the Business Network for Offshore Wind to explain a little bit more about this national study that is currently underway. Ross, I believe you should be able to speak now.
Yeah, hi. You can hear me, Harry?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. My name is Ross Gould, Vice President for Supply Chain Development at the Business Network for Offshore Wind. In my role at the network, I oversee the expansion and evolution of the supply chain and our workforce initiatives. The network provides the most relevant industry information, supply chain connections, which is important to all of you in Louisiana as you look to connect with the Northeast on the existing projects. And we focus on workforce opportunities. The network, as you heard, is involved in a comprehensive U.S. offshore wind supply chain project. The purpose of the supply chain roadmap is to present the collective benefits of a domestic supply chain and facilitate the acceleration of the offshore wind industry in the U.S. We are collaborating with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and DNV on the project. Our efforts will include gathering data through our Supply Chain Connect tool, which you saw a link to in the chat. And it's a database used by developers to search for suppliers and it's used by vendors to introduce themselves to the industry. The network, NREL and DNV will then evaluate the updated database to prepare a detailed analysis of resources and gaps of current suppliers and characterize the benefits of a domestic supply chains that leverages our existing strengths. So please take a moment to sign up in Supply Chain Connect. You'll be advertising your name and your business's capabilities, and you'll be helping us to build a U.S. supply chain for offshore wind. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And my email is also in the chat, so please feel free to reach out. If you're a business interested in getting into offshore wind, please reach out. The Business Network is always available to help you in that. So thank you, Deputy Director. I appreciate the time. And to the panelists, thank you for it. It's been a very informative morning, and I appreciate all of your time. So thank you.
Thank you, Ross. A quick follow-up question. What is the timeline of that study?
So the final report will be published in next year. We're going to be doing some interim findings prior to that. We really need to collect the data and learn about businesses over the next couple of months. So the more information we can find out about U.S. businesses that want to participate in offshore wind now, the better. And again, the more and also those businesses that sign up now, it's a benefit to them because you're getting in early, and vendors and project developers and some of the people that are on this panel will be able to see that you're interested in the industry. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ross. Appreciate that opportunity. I want to make sure that as they conduct their study, that they're aware of all the capabilities that our current companies, businesses have in offshore wind today.
Yeah, and we would be happy to arrange an update at some point with the state of Louisiana and with you, Deputy Director. So and anyone else. So thank you.
I appreciate it, Ross. Certainly, there will be many opportunities to follow up and continue this conversation on offshore wind, and particularly on the supply chain side. So stay tuned on that. I don't see any other questions. So kind of in the meantime, while I review the board, Brad, if you want to follow up.
Michael,
yeah, hop in.
Michael, I want to go to you based on some things that Ross raised, and sounds like this would be a great connect with GNO Wind Alliance. And why don't you tell us, Michael, a little bit about the GNO Wind Alliance, why you guys took this on, and what you're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. I wanted to hop in because I think it definitely relates to what Ross was talking about. So we recognize that getting offshore wind energy going was going to be not only an economic proposition, but also to some degree a political campaign. Not in the sense that we're ideological, but that we had to create a narrative that had broad support and that frankly was not political. that was seen as being kind of all in, bipartisan, just kind of a common sense thing that we should be doing, not just to lower our carbon footprint, but to create great jobs and wealth for Louisianians. So we created the GNO Wind Alliance to begin to build this grassroots entity that could be used to communicate and advocate and promote offshore wind energy. And so the Alliance now has over 100 members. They include traditional hydrocarbon energy companies, offshore supply companies, engineers, fabricators, academics, nonprofits. We really love the fact that it's so broad and ecumenical, and is clearly it clearly expresses the breadth of the potential for this sector. And so if folks would like to become a part of this, Anthony has put the link, or will put the link below in the chat. Our rates are very reasonable. It's free. And it's really just about building a coalition of the willing and able. And we have precedent for this. We discovered that through our work on national flood insurance, that if you build a broad enough coalition of people who are leading in terms of economic opportunity as much as philosophy or ideology, you're able to create momentum that is political, that's in the media, and that ripples around the country. And it tends to really kind of be propulsive. So we're going to be doing things like building out a website to promote wind energy, advocating in DC for particular policies that are needed, whether it's with BOEM or it's the RISE legislation to dedicate 50% of revenues back to adjacent states, educating the public about wind energy and some very basic questions like, is moderate wind enough? What do we do about hurricanes? And even educating locals about the fact that, for example, the longest blades in the world are being designed and tested in Louisiana, out at Michoud at LM Wind Power. But again, we're leading with this as an economic development proposition first and foremost. And that means that the more stakeholders we can bring on board from the broadest array possible of sectors and perspectives, the more powerful we're going to be. So we'd love people to join the GNO Wind Alliance. And it has a slogan, of course, and a logo. Can't show the logo, but the slogan is "Laissez le bon vent souffler," let the good wind blow.
Yeah, you're raising something, Michael, that I strongly believe in, and that's kind of something I've held, is that if you don't tell your story, somebody else will, and it's really up to us. Tell Louisiana's story, and we appreciate the fact that you're helping create the narrative, and certainly it's events like this. Harry and his team
all part of it,
taking on basically a whole week and being able to put basically 10 hours of programming online where various stakeholders can learn more about what's happening in this space in Louisiana. So Harry, thanks to your team and for all the work that you have done. And I'll ask you guys to all kind of put your economic development hats on. And if you were, in addition to anything else that we've talked about over the last 40 or so minutes, if you were sitting across the table from an offshore wind developer and you had to make an elevator pitch about Louisiana, tell me a little bit about what that pitch would be. And again, I'll kind of throw it open to the entire panel.
I'll jump in first, if that's okay. I think from my perspective, it's the expertise in supply chain capability that exists in South Louisiana, and in particular at our port, in terms of offshore energy services, of construction and day-to-day activity. There's no place better than South Louisiana and Port Fourchon to be able to do that. So it doesn't matter if it's drilling for oil or placing a jacket for an offshore wind turbine. It's about services and capability, and we have it. And it's been really great to work with GNO Inc. on their Wind Alliance. It's been really good to be a part of the BOEM Intergovernmental task force had the meeting last week, and a part of Louisiana Wind Week. Things are moving very quickly. I think the interesting thing is that we're trying to move as quickly as possible to position all of ourselves individually, but the state as a whole, to place ourselves in a position to, as soon as the Gulf of Mexico is ready to go for offshore wind, that we're ready to jump on it, right? We're ready to move and do things. I think we're going to run as quickly as the speed of government, and that's what we're going to have to be paying attention to. And I'm not talking state government, obviously. You know, there's reports and studies and things that have to be done, but we're gonna position ourselves that when those are done, we're ready to move. And I think that's why the as quick as we can put ourselves together as a state, that's the best thing for us to move as we move forward in the next few years.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
And Brad, I'll mention just real quickly, we're handling windmill blades, the components, the tower sections now. And, with Gulf Offshore Wind, we have proven success so far in handling what we've been handling. And I think that would just continue if we move forward with Gulf Offshore Wind.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll kind of go, Michael, to something else you raised, and that's the policy. And again, I'll throw this open to the entire panel. As we see this kind of progression of renewable energy, offshore wind, what do regional economic development organizations like yours, what do you need from the federal government? And what would you want to see, or what do you need from state government or local government or any other governmental entity?
At the high level, Brad, it's going to be policies and signals that that make development of a local supply chain economical. The worst case right now would be that because of either policies or local procurement rules, or frankly just cost involved in logistics, that it makes more sense for the New Jersey or Virginia wind farms to be built with components shipped in from Europe. And right now that is actually, I think, to some degree what the case is. And so it's got to be policies and, again, market signals that encourage economic development of domestic capabilities in a way that's strategic and rational. Does that make sense, Harry? I see you're nodding to me.
Completely. I think we need to demonstrate as a whole of government, and I think that's what the governor has tried to do with Wind Week. And I'm on countless calls with Brad at LED, with Jason Longclaw and Secretary Harris over at DNR, really taking this whole of government approach to demonstrate that, as he said, as the governor said on Monday, Louisiana is all in on offshore wind, and to, be open to ideas and suggestions on, what are the policies that we can, put in place to further support. And I think, as this conversation continues, because it's, this is not the end of Wind Week, isn't the end of the conversation, and it is really just beginning and working not only within state government, but with everybody on this panel, our ports, our economic development organizations, the Wind Alliance, and then, collectively approaching our, the federal government and, being very clear in our asks because they've been honed already on the local and state level.
Yep, exactly. That's a very important statement. This is a headwind, not a tailwind.
Yes, sir. I do see we have a question. I want to make sure. Oh, Claire, do you have want to hop in first?
Yeah, Harry and Brad, what I would add to that is that we see a broader support for community benefit agreements, that we see support of local qualified vendors, suppliers, and subcontractors. Believe me when I say that when EPCs come to town, there is often a gap in time for them to understand that we do have local vendors, suppliers, and subcontractors that can meet their needs. pretty rapidly and probably meet or exceed their expectations. And so for me, sometimes I find myself being the only voice that is loud enough and consistent enough to get EPCs to understand that there are qualified locals across South Louisiana and just in Louisiana, period. And so having support at the local, regional and state level for the implementation of what are already developed great templates for community benefit agreements, and the encouragement of project teams, project owners, and their EPCs to first look local and see what they can source. Because we have been talking for an entire week about our capacity in the state of Louisiana. And if all of us on this call don't stand arm in arm and present to the procurement folks that are deciding on these contracts that we all know are coming for qualified locals, you know, it doesn't matter if the local is coming from Chet or Claire or anywhere in between. If it's a local to Louisiana and they're a qualified vendor, supplier, and subcontractor, all of us win. But we all have to join our voices together and make sure that that's heard.
Great point. This is an expanding pie, and so there's plenty to go around, and let's just be united in our messaging and our policies. I want to go to the board. I see Fred Palmer has a question or a comment, and then there's another question in the chat. Let's see. Fred, are you able to unmute yourself now? Fred? Do you have a question for the group, Fred? May have been an errant hand raise. I'll put you back on mute, and if you want to come back, we can get to you next. But I do see a question in the chat from Rachel Odell. Will we see more alliances of US-based offshore wind developers and financiers? And what role will developers play in port infrastructure developments for offshore wind? And maybe that kind of assumes that there are some improvements, expansions to our existing port infrastructure. So maybe our port folks can get into that, and then kind of get to the question of what role developers can play in providing those upgrades.
I'll answer first. It's pretty quick. I think the answer to all of it is yes. There'll be a role for all of those things to happen where, you know, we'll just have to see. We're at the very beginnings of this, and we're gonna have to be looking at offshore wind suppliers and those and financing those projects. They have to be marketable, obviously. So that's going to be what we're going to be investigating and looking at over the next several months and years as we move forward and getting closer to a reality.
Anyone else care to hop in on that? If not, we have another question. Post for Brad, actually, our moderator gets a question, but it's with respect to the restrictive nature of local content requirements that we're seeing in some of the power purchase agreements on the East Coast. Kind of do you have any thoughts on sort of how that works? You know, the impacts to states and companies that are located in Louisiana, but also maybe thinking about how it's worked with the oil and gas sector in the Gulf Coast, and not really having those local content requirements, but still being able to kind of expand the pie, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think there's something in Louisiana law. I'm going way back now, and I'm not a lawyer, but something called Rule 1 in the courts have been determined you can't really absolutely mandate it, but I think Claire hit on it. When our local suppliers, when they interact with these larger EPC contractors, when they have the ability to demonstrate their prior success and their ability to execute. It's pretty easy for, I think, an EPC to realize that if I hire local, I'm going to have better local relationships, and I'm going to maybe win over more of my stakeholders or more of my key audiences, things like that. And as Claire said, it's win-win-win. We all win when that happens. And I think the probably all week and in the prior panel right before us demonstrated the capabilities that exist from Louisiana companies. And certainly those companies should be at the table, should be considered for any work that, as Chet said, when that first lease sale can happen and that first permit can be granted, that Louisiana companies are part of those projects.
Hey, Brad,
Harry,
I just want to add real quick.
Sorry, Ricky, go ahead.
No, Claire, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that Supply Chain Connect. The people who work with me from small to medium to large size businesses know that I promote the ways in which our vendors, suppliers, and subcontractors can be procured and to be visible is to get yourself in front of those procurement professionals. And so it appears this Supply Chain Connect that Ross Gould mentioned earlier, it's in the chat. When I think about the programs that have been created by Louisiana Economic Development to get our businesses collectively in one location and begin to vet them for these EPCs so they don't have to do that work on their end. It appears, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but this Supply Chain Connect is where we need to be directing all size businesses that come to us so that they can get it upfront, get involved as quickly as they can. This looks like the way.
And just to put a finer point on that, thank you for plugging that again, because I think we don't want to miss the boat in terms of, we've seen the value of NREL studies in terms of energizing, like for the Gulf of Mexico with the 2 studies that came out last year. This is a Department of Energy funded effort in part. And so we really want to make sure that, we know that this study is going to receive a national or international audience. And so we want to make sure that we are well represented there. And Ricky, I know you had a comment as well.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say
Ricky.
real quick what Brad was saying as far as using locals. We started handling windmill blades and the components and tower sections probably 2 years ago. And the group that's handling them are so good at handling windmill components. They have actually called them the Gator Gang. And they go around, they've been trained, and now they go around, the company that's handling them sends them to train other groups to handle the windmill blades, components, and towers because they're so good. I mean, these guys and these men and women they're local from Calcasieu, Cameron Parish, and they are so good at what they do. They are now going around training others to do the same thing. So what Claire was saying is really spot on. I mean, the people here know exactly what they're doing. They're good, and they're good at what they do. And I think anybody that's going to locate here will understand that.
Thank you. We are coming at the top of the hour. I'll give Fred Palmer. Did you have one? Are you able to take yourself off mute? Did you have a question or a comment?
Hey, Harry, it's Fred. I think it was a raised hand in error. So
okay, very good. Well, with
good
that,
to see you, Fred.
Good to hear and see you all.
Well, I just want to thank our panelists and our moderator today. I mean, we really just, we dove right into a ton of content. I think this has been incredibly informative to help hone our message and share information. But, I have a whole list of additional questions that are teed up or topics for further conversations. And so we will be, kind of debriefing with, different stakeholders, figure out what the next steps are, working with GNO Inc.'s Wind Alliance, the Offshore Wind Business Network, and their effort, and really just continue this conversation and answer, start to answer questions that were raised, but we didn't quite have a definite answer this week. And so there's still research that needs to be done across the board. These studies on supply chain, especially, I also want to just note that for those who weren't able to attend all of the sessions this week, the videos will be posted on the Wind Week website, on the governor's website. So you'll be able to go back and catch the reruns. And we'll also put up the slide decks as well for previous panels. But please do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email is harry.vorhoff@la.gov. And I will help to direct your questions or comments and connect folks to our panelists or to each other. Because this is really not only just a government effort, this is private industry, our NGOs, we really need to kind of move this conversation forward together. So thank you very much for your time, and y'all have a great week. And
thanks, Harry. Thanks to all the panelists. Appreciate
Great work,
it.
Harry. Great work, Brad. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks to all your panelists.
Thank you. Laissez le bon vent souffler, right?
Laissez le bon vent souffler.
Take care, y'all.
Allons-y.